Alright, so I just thought I would do a video going over tips and tricks for building in Vintage Story, because there's a few weird little things that people might not know and I think are pretty interesting, and also just go over, I'm standing here in my village project, how I did some stuff, like how I did, this roof here, or these little railings, stuff like that. Firstly, I think the most important part for building is knowing your tools. So in my hotbar here, I've got a texture flipper, a chisel, a wrench, and a lantern. And these are all pretty essential tools for creative building. The texture flipper is creative only, so if you're in survival, you won't be able to get that. But the other ones are quite essential, and I'll show you what they do in case you don't already know. Starting with the chisel, as you may already know, can be used to chip away different voxels and add voxels onto blocks, so you can create custom decorations, and they have collision that is accurate to the voxels. The chisel can also be used to add different block textures together, so like this, and you can do this with any kind of block you want. By default, it's only stone and wood blocks, though you can change that with a world setting, and it is for all blocks in creative. And another thing the chisel can do that some people might not know about is you can, normally when you have things like these logs with a set orientation, if you try and chisel it, you can't have another log running parallel to that, and you can't add more logs in there, but you can actually still do this. So if you have logs of different orientations, the first step is to chisel all three, or all of them, whatever blocks you're using, whatever orientations you want, and then break them. So you pick them up as separate items and make sure they're all facing the ways that you want them to face in the final chisel block. Then you set your game mode to survival, and then you can craft them together. You have to grid craft them. You can't combine them in the chisel interface, or if you're already in survival, building in survival, you can just open your inventory to do that. But once you've done that, you can have your blocks facing different directions within your textures facing different directions within the same block, like that. There's a rift there now because I set this to survival. The next tool is the texture flipper. So this is a creative only item, although the Better Ruined mod does add a survival version of this as a Jonas device. But what it allows you to do is you can place clutter items like these, and a tank, big barrel, and then what you can do is you press F and you can change their textures. So you can actually have them not look moldy and rotten if you want. This isn't a thing in vanilla survival though, so you are mostly, when it comes to clutter, you are limited to the textures found in ruins, which are charred, very aged, and mossy, although I find that aged isn't used a lot on clutter in ruins. They mostly use these three. So this is what you're limited to in survival for clutter textures, but then in creative you can freely change them to whatever you like. Although the texture flipper does not work with all clutter items. So beds are a notable example, maybe something like a drafting table. These cannot be texture flipped, only some items can be texture flipped. So here I'm pressing F and nothing's happening. Oddly enough, some can. These ones, these ruined ones, can be texture flipped, but not the others. I assume because they have this square pattern is a custom texture. Like in the files, it's not part of the wood type, it's baked in, and so they would need wood type versions for this square texture to be able to texture flip the clutter beds, and they don't have that. But you can texture flip a lot of items. There's a good amount that you can do that with. Some things also allow you to texture flip the books. So lecterns and book stands, you can texture flip the books that they display. Although do be aware that aged orange doesn't have a large book variant. So if you get a book stand like this, you can texture flip to the large book variants, but aged orange doesn't have one for some reason. The last tool that is quite important for building is the wrench. Now this is a survival mode accessible tool. You can smith them, and they allow you to do some interesting things with clutter and with some rotatable blocks. So with something like planks, the wrench can change their orientation, and it can also be used to rotate clutter, including sideways, upside down. Although it is a little janky sometimes, rotating the way you want it to go, it does work. Sometimes you have to crouch rotate or rotate on different faces to get what you want to get, the orientation you want. But it also allows you to do something like this, where you can offset clutter. So here the skeleton is inside the bed, but if I offset it up, I can have it on top. And you can offset anything you want. So say I had a block here, and I wanted multiple clay figurines on top. I wanted these both on top of this block. You can't place them like that normally, but you can offset them onto there. The only thing is that hitboxes do sometimes get a little wonky. So I have to look over here to get this guy's hitbox, but it's usually fine. I find that the clay figurines actually have better hitbox detection when offset. I think that's because they are used in one of the story locations and they are offset there, so maybe extra effort was put into that. But again, offsetting can be used to do something like this, or you could stack your chairs. Let's do it like this. You can do all sorts of things with offsetting. Now, an item that's used, I use a lot in my builds, and that gets used in one of the story locations, is beams as roofing. So this shack here that I built has a roof that is nice and slanted, and it doesn't use normal roof pieces. It uses support beams on top of chisel blocks. Same for this one. And there are special beams only accessible in creative mode called roof beams, and they are just longer than normal beams. So that's a normal beam, and then you'll notice that the roof beam is thicker, so it makes it easier to create roofing like that. But these are not accessible in survival mode. They can't be made, they can't be crafted, found, bought. They are creative only, sadly. Hopefully one day they add them to survival mode. But you can, if you're in survival, use normal beams, like this shack over here, which uses regular maple support beams. This one's pine. The wood grain on pine is a little funky. Maple meshes better in my eyes at a distance. And I also alternated doing up, down, up, down, down, just to break up the texture a little more. Inside, this is the chiseled blocks that they sit on top of to achieve that effect. So if I grab something like marble as a demonstration here, so you can kind of make whatever roof shape you want. It just has to be fine enough that, you can't see those gaps. So usually I find this is an acceptable voxel size where you won't see the gaps like that. So a roof beam, and it looks just fine from there. And you can get normal beams as well. You can also use this to create roofing of unusual angles. So say I had, a roof like this. I wanted to do a roof on a slant like this that isn't the standard angle of normal roof blocks. Normally they go like this, and say I didn't want that, I wanted to have it at a lower angle. You can do that with this beam method. And you can get your beams. Let's use oak. And you can do this. And there you go, a nice angled roof without having to use creative roof beams. That's just using normal survival-friendly support beams. On the topic of beams, there are some unobtainable ones other than roofing beams. The metal beams like this, and the aged beams, the very aged and rotten beams, I mean, like these are unobtainable, and that is because, as far as I know, very aged logs cannot be found in any ruins. They aren't in any loot pools either, and so you cannot use them to craft very aged beams even though they have a crafting recipe. And that's a shame because these are used a lot in one of the story locations. These are used a lot in the upcoming 1.22 trader houses, so I'm hoping they remedy that eventually. And also on that note, actually, aged wood is interesting because there's a discrepancy between its textures. There are two types of aged wood, which are aged and very aged, although they aren't properly distinguished. So if I get a antler mount of aged and very aged here, aged logs can be debugged into this texture, but very aged logs also exist. Aged planks, which are made from these logs, have the texture of very aged wood, despite the debugged log using this browner texture. This also goes for things like doors, bookshelves, support beams, and I think antler mounts are a good example because they have both variants. You can see their material aged, material very aged, although the very aged one isn't craftable. Only the aged one is, though it uses the aged boards which have the very aged texture. So aged wood is an interesting wood type. There's a lot of inconsistency within its textures, and that is just kind of something you might want to be aware of when building, is that there is no way to get this brown texture as a plank, sadly. Another useful tip when building is F3. You can press F3 in creative to go into Noclip mode, and it's very useful if you are chiseling, say this strong box here that I've done before. If you're chiseling something like this and you want to just kind of get, in the small details, you can enter Noclip mode. It's quite handy. So as an example of a build that uses these techniques is, let's say, the tavern from my village project, probably my favorite building here, because the roof here is made out of these roofing beams which have chisel blocks underneath them. The railings here are made out of logs of different orientations, grid crafted together. And then inside there's a lot of this kind of thing going on, where different oriented logs, such as these beams here, these are chisel blocks, not support beams, have intersecting textures. These windows too, this goes across and then this goes up. The texture flipper is used here too, such as these small crates having the texture of maple, like that. These chairs having an oak texture. They aren't aged like the tables because the floor is aged and I thought that they blended in too much. Upstairs uses more beams of differing orientations. One of my new favorite ways to do ceilings that I've discovered is like this, doing these interesting, they look like reinforced kind of wooden panels. And these are done with an aged log and plaster. So plaster, and I'll also grab an altar here for the same reason. Plaster is interesting because you can chisel out the white part of the actual plaster while keeping the wooden part. And then if you add in another texture, you can use the wood as a kind of frame that frames a different texture, like I do here. Same goes for altars. You can chisel altars, which is actually, it took me a while to figure this out. I didn't expect these to be chiselable, but you can. So you could do some interesting things with that. Though the carpet on top will only face in one direction when chiseled. So a lot of my builds, like this room I'm actually in now, use a lot of creative only features and items. So like these crates that you can get from ruins, but are texture flipped here to not look moldy. These tables, these chairs, this tableware, these writing utensils, this rug, these logs, these gadgets, this banner, this book row. All these things are unobtainable in survival mode, sadly. Unless you are using mods, in which case you might be able to get them, depending on what the mod adds. I know Better Ruins has some of this vanilla unobtainable clutter obtainable from ruins in that mod. So to kind of showcase some of the things I've talked about in this video, I might build a little cabin like these ones, just so you can kind of get a look at what my process is there. I usually make these little cabins 3x3, though you could do whatever size you want really. And then just chiseling this in, so it's you know, a thinner wall. Another thing you can do while chiseling is that if you have, this is a new feature, if you have multiple textures in one block, you can middle mouse click when chiseling. So I'm on the packed dirt texture here, I middle mouse click on the clay, and now I'm placing clay, middle mouse on the packed dirt, now I'm placing packed dirt. That's a new feature that was added recently. Again, this is another thing that's unobtainable in survival. You actually cannot get the age sleek door. You can get all the other sleek door variants though. If you want, you could definitely texture this with different types of rammed earth, but I'm just gonna keep it simple for this one. Inside can be packed dirt. And then for the roof, now this may look odd, but this is needed for the beams when I put the roof beams on, because the way beams work, I'll use oak beams actually, because this can be, aside from the door, survival friendly. The beams, the way they work, if you don't have these and you're just trying to place them on the flat of that, it can work, but sometimes it'll clip through depending on, I've raised this up by 1 block so it might not, but sometimes it will like to clip through, so I always just play it safe and do this. Now I'll fill in, I'll use, say, oak planks, because I'm using oak beam. Actually, I was going to say I could use aged beams, but there's no planks with the brownish aged wood texture, so that would not work. But chisel this to be the same shape as the roof here. Of course, you can go all out if you want. You could have, you know, a kind of attic window, sort of triangle coming out here, but I'm not going to do that. I've done that in other builds. That takes a lot of time. I also like to, you could keep this flat, of course, but I like to have it kind of shaped to the roof. I could pause time in creative. I could avoid having to switch the time myself, but I don't know, it's kind of fun sometimes seeing your builds at night. So doing beam roofs like this can take a while in survival, in which case I'll show you after this how to do some interesting things with the regular vanilla roofing blocks, though they definitely aren't as versatile as beam roofs are. Okay, so now that the roof is on here, I'm just going to put the beams in, and I'm going to alternate going up and down to kind of help break up the texture a little. Whoop. See, this is where 1.22's crowbar will come in handy, where you can remove the last placed beam on a block, since that would allow me to just undo that mistake instead of having to start again. Well, I'll break the block and then place all the beams again. One side done. Two going up like that. I like to do this to break up the repetitive texture of the beams. Maple, I think, would have been a better choice for this, since the repeating is a lot less noticeable from afar with maple, but that is okay. And now let's do the little interior here, although I will actually get a window in here. I like to use quartz glass because it's quite visible as opposed to how see-through regular glass is. And in creative, I use lead for these to make them look lead lined, but in survival, I'd recommend something like basalt rock or shale or slate. Any of these kind of blackish rocks would make a decent lead substitute. The way that the vanilla game likes to do windows is having these little kind of patterns on the edges. It's why I usually like to mimic that if I'm trying to make a build fit in with the vanilla style. Okay, there we go, little window. That's nice. Now for the interior, I'll probably just throw in, we'll get a bed, we'll get maybe a table and chair by the window, maybe chair there, table in the corner. I'll try this. I don't know what I like. I'm just gonna put this like this for now, and then we will see. Chest, shelf. That's nice. Tableware. Mode. There we go. Here can be maybe crate. K-pop. How's that look? Maybe I want the. Do I want it to be on a funky angle? Maybe. Get a tool rack. Although that can. Tool racks are sometimes finicky. They like. If I get a full block of rammed earth here and then put a tool rack on, then chisel it back down, it will let me place it. Sometimes they can be placed on like thin blocks like this. Sometimes they just don't want to be for some reason, but it works like this either way. What can go here? Maybe crate of pottery. Yeah. That can be aged maybe. Or K-pop. That looks nice. By the way, crates have a randomized size, so sometimes something will sit flush on top and sometimes it won't. That is the same for some other things, like coat racks have a randomized size, but not many blocks do. Only a few examples like that. We'll put some things on the shelf here. Get maybe grey bowls. Get a crock. And maybe an amethyst crystal. That's nice. Maybe a seashell too. That's nice. And actually, get a painting in here. We'll do Traveler's Solitude, Sleeping Wolf, that's some of my favorites. Maybe we'll do... Doesn't want to be placed there, because that's a... Paintings are weird sometimes. Do I want this? Maybe Last Day would be good, because it takes up 2 like that. That's kind of interesting, but I like the color scheme of Sleeping Wolf better, I think. That's nice. Yeah, okay. That looks good, I think, and we'll get a purple carpet to kind of match the crystal, and the green kind of matches the painting. And then for the tool rack, let's get a knife, maybe silver knife. That's nice. Forks, forks, sure. And what else? Maybe shears. Yeah, that's good. Actually, maybe an axe. If this is, you know, it's kind of in the style of the 1.22 trader houses, I'll put in, the trader might want an axe. Maybe a saw. Doesn't matter. Anyway, there's a little cottage. The lighting's a bit funky because chisel blocks, but there's a small little cottage using some of these techniques, and it looks nice on the inside, I think. At least for as nice as a, you know, really cramped little space can be. I like doing cramped builds a lot, trying to, you know, stuff a lot of detail into a tiny space like this. Although they might want a lantern too, actually. Let's get maybe brass. Where can this go? It's a bit awkward. That's kind of right on the chair, but you know what, it will do for now. That's nice enough for now. So that was for beam roofing, but for normal roofing like this thatch, I would like to show off some techniques quickly that you can use to make it look a little more interesting. We'll get a basic kind of early game thatch shack going on here, although I'm using aged wood, just because I like aged wood. Early game you'd probably be using rammed earth, packed earth, whatever. Get some of this going on. Usually I wouldn't do full logs in the corners. If anything, I'd chisel quarter logs into them, but this is just a quick little showcase thing. Although even though it is a quick little showcase thing, I at least want a window, like, come on. That's better. On that too. Okay. Anyway, thatch roofing. Thatch roofing is interesting. I mean, when I say thatch roofing, I mean all roofing. All these generic roofing blocks and the way they work. So normally roof blocks, you'll notice they're like this. They have this blocky underside that you can't chisel, you can't do anything with, and it looks really ugly if you just build your roof like this. Like, it doesn't look that great. And I want to show something that can kind of help get around that. Okay, so the trick is putting whatever block the blocky underside of your roof is, whatever texture that is, put it underneath and then chisel it into a slope. That's the whole trick. So you do this and you can actually make your roof look kind of sloped and nice like that. Like that. That's much better than the other side, which is like this. And you can do this on the inside too. So placing, these kind of go this direction. Placing your hay blocks. Well, these kind of go up actually. So maybe they can be like this. And you could chisel, this is normal hay here, you could chisel it so that you've got like a divot, or you could keep it solid if you want to hang a lantern from that. I'm going to have the divot because of the next step, which as always is beams. Beams are great. You can put beams on the underside of your roof. You can put beams everywhere. Anyway, I usually just like to do beams, well, like this, so that the roof has a bit more support. Especially with thatch roofs, I sometimes don't do this with timber ones or clay ones, because they, you know, kind of have more support naturally. But these thatch ones, I like doing on the side with beams, so it's more realistic that way. The ones in a certain story location go like really crazy with this. There's like beams everywhere. They're like really tightly packed like that. I usually just do them one block apart, because tightly packing that many beams, especially if your roof is a weird shape, like if you've got an inner corner, if that bent here and went off there, you'd have to, it'd be a bit of a nightmare. It's already a bit of a nightmare with one block spacing. I will do cross beams actually. Sometimes cross beams are kind of cool like this. That's nice. Maybe I should go overboard. Maybe I should really embrace the beam. Do this. Yeah, I'll do that for this one. If this was like a bigger build or had a more complex roof, I would not be doing this. Because this is like a billion logs worth of beams anyway, considering that, what's it, one debugged log only makes 3 beams. I wonder if another cross beam would go here. Yeah. Yeah, that's nice. That's good, actually. Wait, what's that? Did I place it weird? Hang on. I did, I think. Yeah. Okay, that's nice. There we go, nice thatched roof. I sometimes leave this empty so I can have the beam like that, but I mean, you know, you could have your beam coming along like this. Maybe I'll do that here. That's good. Try and make sure you place it on the block that isn't the wall, because otherwise there'll be a hitbox on the wall and you won't be able to place things up here. I've been playing Legacy Minecraft lately, and if I broke the block under that door in Legacy Minecraft, that door would break. I was thinking that that was gonna have broken then, but luckily not. Alright, so there's a nice little shack made with regular roofing blocks. So actually, now before I finish this, let's put beams here. So yeah, there's a nice little shack that's made with regular roofing blocks, and they're a bit sloped because of chiseling. Thatch roofing, it didn't used to be this way. The texture underneath used to be different from hay, and so it looked kind of odd, but they finally fixed it recently, which is really nice for this kind of stuff. You know what, while I'm here, let's do another interior. Now, there's, the main type of wooden ladder has the generic wood texture, which is this. It's not a wood type you can get in survival, but these aged ones can be texture flipped to any wood type you want. In creative, you can't do that in survival. And then also, when you're adding different oriented logs, you can add the normal up-facing log, only the up-facing log, and only if the thing you're doing it to isn't already up-facing, which is weird, but it's just how it works. Alright, that seems like a good little interior, I think. So yeah, there's a shack with the regular roof blocks and this, interior that I didn't need to spend all that time on, but there you go. Alright, so I think that's gonna do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed and maybe you learned something new. I'm sure there's plenty of other tricks that I could have covered but didn't. But I just thought that was a good little list of things that might help people when they're trying to figure out how to build more interesting stuff, especially the wood orientation. I don't see that a lot with some builds, and I think it's a really handy trick. You can see even in this frame, I've got the stairwell there and the chair. Use that wood orientation trick to have different wood grains at the same chisel block. But yeah, there you go. That was some tips and tricks for building in Vintage Story. See ya.